Please like and subscribe. Thank you. Enjoy the video. Also, about our channel trailer, we plan on doing Hypixel Skyblock, Bed Wars, and other content as a co-op. So, please enjoy. There are lots of different weapons in Hypixel Skyblock, none being more prevalent than the sword. The sword is the most basic weapon in the game, and as such, there are good and there are bad. Today, we are going to be over the top 10 best swords in Hypixel Skyblock. Hope you enjoy.
So before we start the list, we do have some honorable mentions. One of them is the Undead Sword. We don't think it deserves to be one of the best weapons in the game, but I think it deserved a mention because it is the first weapon you're going to use. It's the best weapon you're going to have. You could consider the Spider Sword and the End Sword too, but the Undead Sword is the best because most mobs that you will be fighting in the early game are undead. So the extra 100% damage towards undead is the most useful of the three swords. The other two aren't horrible for early game, but the Undead Sword is probably the best. The Pigman Sword. It hasn't been the best in the game for a while, but we mainly wanted to do it for historical reasons. Same with the Midas Sword. It is a very strong sword. It can pretty much be tied with AOTD with a Pigman pet, but AOTD is a lot more worth it for the price, because the Pigman Sword can get pretty pricey, but it's also not horrible as a mage item, but AOTD is better, so yeah. With all that concluded, let's get on to the actual list.
Starting off the list at number 10, we have the Aspect of the End, along with the Aspect of the Void, since it's just a tiered item. These items would definitely be higher on the list, if not for a couple of things. Number one is that it's a good place to start the list off. It's a decent sword for progression, and it has a great ability to go with it. Also, the reason it's not higher on the list is because it's more ability focused. We plan on making a list about abilities, however, the weapons we're talking about here are more valued for their abilities rather than their stats, so we didn't want to put it too high up. Number 9. The Dreadlord Sword and Bonza Staff. Immediately counteracting what we just talked about in number 10, the Dreadlord Sword and Bonza Staff are great mage items for early game dungeons, both of which fire out a pretty strong projectile for their ease of access and price. It's very helpful to have even in late game, as you can do certain clips and certain different glitches and exploits with things like the Bonza Staff, as well as in the past, it was used as a low mana spending weapon for floor 4 mages who didn't want to use a lot of mana and instead opted for Dreadlord Sword, or even the Jerry Sheen Gun once it came out even after floor 4 was used. The Dreadlord Sword at epic rarity probably costs around 50,000 coins at its peak of 5-star, or maybe a little bit more at a 100k. However, the Bonza Staff is normally around 2 to 3 million coins with Ultimate Wise 5, and is definitely a must-have for floor 1 to floor 3 mage progression.
The Raider Axe is probably one of the most popular weapons in this game, being known for its really good coins per kill, especially with the scavenger reforge and a hound pet equipped. You can get a decent amount of coins. Now its damage is pretty solid, especially for where it is in the game right now. That's why it's on the top 10 list. It's very powerful for how cheap it is. Now, the only reason it's not higher on the list is because the Aspect of the Dragons exists, and we will get to that in due time. But the Raider Axe, pretty solid. The 115 damage and 150 strength is quite a lot for an early game item, and even though it can take some time to get the numbers up for the damage and strength, it's not that hard, especially with foraging minions or just foraging a lot in general. The only shortcoming I'd say this item has is it can be kind of annoying to get on an early game profile, as the whole quest line for it can be sort of annoying. Otherwise, very solid weapon.
Number 7, the Aspect of the Dragons. This weapon is on here as somewhat of a legacy, although it is still a very good weapon for mid-game, as it is only about 1 million coins nowadays. The Aspect of the Dragon is the weapon that you get as a chance from fighting dragons, such as Superior, Wise. Any dragon can drop the Aspect of the Dragons. However, it is not normally obtained this way. It's normally obtained through the auction house. People just buy it. It's very cheap, but over time it has become outclassed. It's mainly on this list for historical reasons and for the fact that it's just an overall good mid-game weapon. Its stats outclass the Raider's Axe and Aspect of the End in terms of damage and strength. However, as previously mentioned with the AOTE and Raider's Axe, they both have very helpful abilities that may encourage you to keep them over the Aspect of the Dragons.
We contemplated a lot while putting this on the list, but I think the Aspect of the Shredded deserves a spot in the best of the best weapons. The amount of damage you can get out of this thing, especially with its throw ability, can be pretty insane. Stacking 2 times damage, but cost 2 times mana with multiple throws. Now, just throwing it once, 10% of melee damage. It's pretty good. 140 damage and 115 strength, while not a whole lot, especially, I'm pretty sure the Aspect of the Dragons by itself actually has better stats than that. The 250% damage to zombies is where a lot of this thing's power is effective. It's also a very good dungeon item. I believe it's the meta for Berserkers right now, and it shows. It's a very, very powerful weapon, and those of you who have done dragons a lot know how much ghost damage you can get with this thing. You can get into the tens of millions. It's insane. Which is why we consider this one of the best weapons in the game.
Number 5, the Livid Dagger. The Livid Dagger is one of the 2 main weapons from floor 5 of the dungeons. Of course, you fight Livid in this boss fight, so it's his dagger. Naturally, it would have some ability. The Shadow Fury is what you can normally frag with Livid fragments. However, it's not on this list as we considered it much worse. The Livid Dagger gives a whopping 100% plus bonus attack speed, so it allows you to hit twice as fast in terms of DPS than a regular sword would. Along with that, it's only slightly worse than the Aspect of the Dragons in terms of single hit damage, but is made up for that by the Backstab ability, a much less talked about aspect of the sword that allows you to deal tons of extra damage on when you hit a backside of the mob. Not only that, but it gives 100% crit chance.
There was a tiny bit of debate putting the Flower of Truth one spot over the Livid Dagger, and while it is interchangeable based on preference, I think the Flower of Truth can be considered a better and more useful weapon. The Livid Dagger is very good, but the Flower of Truth is just that much better. In dungeons specifically, you can clear rooms insanely quickly with this thing, and it's high strength. It's, I believe, 500 strength you can get. When matched with a baby Yeti pet, you can get a lot of defense. The Flower of Truth, for a weapon that costs only a few million coins, very, very good, and I would highly recommend getting this weapon, and just for dungeons alone. Here's another weapon that we had some conflict putting, and originally we had this tied for number 2, but I think it was fair moving this one spot down. The Emerald Blade is one of the most powerful weapons in this game, and can be technically the best in terms of melee damage. Like we said, we had debate with this and the Giant Sword, 2 very good weapons when put one for all on them. This thing can be insane, and with enough coins in your purse, this is better than a Giant Sword, but we decided to put this in number 3 because not everybody has those kinds of coins, and this weapon can be pretty pricey. 2 enchanted emerald blocks is not that cheap for a weapon that you need to have billions of coins in your purse to do well with, but this is still one of the most powerful weapons in this game, and I'd say it's a highly recommended weapon.
Number 2, the Giant Sword. The Giant Sword is the highest base damage weapon in the game, not including the Emerald Blade with One for All, which it does have an enchant, or with a very high amount of coins, but we've already talked about that. The Giant Sword takes this spot over the Emerald Blade for one main reason, and that is LCM, or Left Click Mage. The Giant Sword is dropped from floor 6 and costs significantly more than the Emerald Blade base. However, it can be starred for dungeons, which is very key to Left Click Mage, as they prioritize having a lot of mana and a lot of the damage stat, which allows them to press left click and use their Mage Beam to kill groups of monsters. The starring of the Giant Sword allows it to take over Emerald Blade as we go into our honorable mentions and number 1 spot. Our first 2 honorable mentions are the Zombie Soldier Cutlass. Because of its usefulness in Ironman, it's one of the best things for Berserker on Ironman to start with, and is dropped relatively early on. However, the bonus attack speed is definitely helpful. Our next honorable mention is the Daedalus Axe. Now, the Daedalus Axe on the surface is a very bad weapon. It has very low damage, and even YouTubers like Refraction, even maxing it out, say that it is not a good weapon. However, a recent buff allowed it to be the strongest weapon against Diana event and mythological monsters. This means that it is the best weapon for the event, and combined with something like the Griffin Pet and Chimera 5, even though it's very expensive, it can give you tons upon tons of Magic Find. Magic Find is a stat that is used to determine how common certain drops are, and it definitely is beneficial to have when you're doing grinds such as Slayers or even the Diana event itself. Overall though, it's very difficult to max out, which is why it doesn't take a spot on the list, but it definitely holds a spot as a strong weapon in the game. Finally, at number 1, our number 1 spot is...
To nobody's surprise, the Necron Blades.
Yep, that's
like
right.
I said, I don't think anyone is surprised by this. Nothing competes with them in terms of swords.
Right. If you don't know, the 4 Necron Blades are the Hyperion, Valkyrie, Astrea, and Scylla, each of which is crafted with an unrefined Necron Blade and one of the 4 floor 6 frags that you can get from the floor 7 Blood Room.
Alright, so before I'll start explaining 3, he'll explain to you Hyperion. I think I'd throw another honorable mention here and say the Necron Blade. It's not a good weapon, but you know, it's a crafting material. So you have the Valkyrie, the Valkyrie, the Astrea, and the Scylla. All 3 of them, the Valkyrie is probably the best of the 3. Scylla's alright, and Astrea is probably the worst one, but Astrea, it can be used. You know, if you have troubles with health, Valkyrie is one of the best, if not the best melee swords in the game. And then the Scylla is also up there, and obviously Scylla, you know, people meme with it, so see Scylla.
Right.
And then he'll describe to you Hyperion.
Right. Finally, the Hyperion is definitely the most special of them because it gives mana, and I think it might give... No, it doesn't give ability damage. Cut that out, please. The Hyperion gives a bunch of mana, so it is the best to use with the Wither Impact scrolls once all combined together. However, even though we talked about the AoTE already, the Hyperion does not outclass it. Plenty of people still use the AoTE or AoTV if they don't want to do damage to mobs around them, or if they don't want to spend a lot of mana, as the Hyperion costs 300 mana per use, while the AOTE only costs 50, 25 with Ultimate Wise. With that being said, we'd like to thank you all for watching. I'm Vam.
I'm Dragon.
And we're wishing you a wonderful night. Peace out.